If you're a composer and you dread the mixing stage, here's a few tips that's helped me a lot. The first one is simply focusing on what we can do outside of the mixing stage to help our mix, in terms of the arrangement, the elements that we include or leave out, and so on. Now this comes down to understanding a few key principles such as the overtones and how to layer and combine instruments without introducing a lot of mud or conflicts in the harmonic overtones. But it's also important to understand the role of foreground, middle ground, and background in our compositions and orchestrations, because this is going to also inform our mixing decisions and create a strong focus in our track, because everything can't be the focus all at once. Now, these are some of the fundamental pillars we're going through in cinematic music adventures. In fact, the foreground, middle ground, background principles is the first quest you're going to encounter as you enroll in the course. And it's been amazing to see the progress in both orchestrations and mixes of the students that have gone through that particular quest. The doors are closing in just a few days, so dive into the quest by clicking the link underneath this video. Let's look at how I prioritize the foreground, middle ground, background in this particular mix. Let's look at a before and after on this back end. Okay, so listening to that, you can feel everything is kind of narrow and everything is pretty much in one space in the middle here. There's nothing really sticking out and taking our attention in the front, and everything is kind of just pushed back, which makes it feel a bit muddy and distant. Now let's listen to the current version of the project, which by no means is a perfect mix, but it's definitely an improvement. Now, nothing new has been added here. All the ingredients that you hear in the first one and the second one are exactly the same. The only difference is essentially the focus and the separation between these elements. So the first thing that sticks out is that the horn is now a lot more prominent, because I decided that this is one of the most important factors to be up front, because I wanted to introduce some more contrast in this section. Versus and once I have that horn in the forefront, everything else kind of becomes positioned accordingly to that. I wanted also to have a deep, rich low end, so having the low end right and that horn became kind of the north stars for where I wanted the other tracks to sit. So that's the first step. Focus on what we can do in terms of the arrangement and the composition. And this also includes getting rid of things that's going to be in the way. In this track, I also got rid of a lot of frequencies and some of conflicting elements that didn't really help me once I figured out what my focuses wanted to be. So that's another side note. Figure out what you can remove in order to give space to the most important elements. Next, I highly recommend using something like Sonarworks Sound ID Reference. I'm using the headphone version, which calibrates my Bose headphones to become a lot more balanced and neutral, which makes it a lot easier to make good mixing decisions, even just on a laptop with headphones. Now, they also have this version for monitors, but to me, this is an absolute must in order to make good mixing decisions and being confident in the decisions that I'm making as I'm tweaking things. As you see, the purple here is before. It was boosting a lot of the low end, and it was taking out a lot of the 1K range here and boosting it over here by around 5K as well. Now, this would have made me do completely the opposite of what I should have done in the low end, and it would have ended up with a lot less impactful mixes. And I might even have boosted some of the 1K area here, which would result in a lot more harshness in my mixes than what's actually there. So I personally really recommend getting some kind of calibration software like this. For me, it's been a game changer. Next, in order to get more width in your orchestral recordings, try to avoid panning the actual track too much, because this is going to collapse the stereo image and make the whole hall seeming like it's coming from the left side while canceling some of the right side signal. Say if you pan the violins to the left like this. You see in the center, it's a lot more full and rich, and it starts to become kind of thin and weird when you pan it hard over to the left. You can feel how everything is thinning out, becoming a lot more narrow and a bit weird sounding as we're panning it hard to the left. So what I recommend doing instead is to actually go into the instrument library if you can, and go to the close mics and only pan those. And then keep the room mics centered so the room itself is not being panned and collapsed over to one side. This is going to give you a bit more of a natural result, but still giving you a bit more of that width if you want to position the instruments a little bit more than they already are in the library. Now, another thing I like to do is to use a reference track and have a track that I want to get a similar balance to, and then put a ProQ on that track and on my master. And then I can play my track and I will see a red curve showing the reference track and the balance of the reference track. And on the EQ here, I will see the balance of my master, and I can see kind of where there is any major differences that I might have to address. Now it's going to be an earlier version of my track on the reference, so the reference is actually going to be worse, but we can still see the difference in the low end and so on. Let's have a listen. Now, we don't always want a balance to be exactly the same as a reference. Sometimes that's going to sound unnatural, given our instrumentation and arrangement and so on. But I find this a really good tool to kind of see visually where the major differences are between mine and a reference track. And I can choose which kind of changes I want to do in order to get closer. Now, the last part, which is often repeated, is to make sure that the low end is not too busy, that you don't have too many elements fighting for space in the low end. In my track, I only have some double basses and a sub bass carrying the entire weight of the low end, together with the booms. If I'm trying to add any more, it's really starting to just cause chaos and building up mud and making the low end less clear. Now, those are the quick tips. If you want to see my entire process from beginning to end, including the mixing stage, check out Cinematic Music Adventures in the link in the description. It's packed with main quests, side quests, and challenges to help you improve both your compositions, orchestrations, and productions. Now, the doors are closing in just a few days, so to join before we kick up the cohort, click the link in the description. I'll see you soon.